Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Travis Seppala. The name of the show is I Might Be Wrong. Thank you all for joining me. Before I get started today, just a reminder to everyone, if you haven't done so already, to take a little bit of time and subscribe, like, follow this podcast wherever you listen to or watch podcasts. All of those things help me grow the show and continue to do what I'm doing. And the nice thing is it really doesn't take a lot of your time to do that, and it would be greatly appreciated. Also, I'd especially like to point out, to remind everybody to try to get over to the YouTube side and subscribe there. Even if you don't spend any time on YouTube, I'm trying to grow that side of the channel. The initial goal is 500 subscribers, and I'm well on my way to that, and just hopefully continue to grow it well past that. So thank you for those things. For all of you who have already done those things, like, subscribe, followed, whatever else it might be, thank you. I appreciate it. I assume you're doing it because you like it. So please share it with people that you think might like it, because ultimately that's how I'm going to be able to continue to do this, is by growing the amount of people who are taking part in it. For anybody who is interested in supporting the channel, you'll find the appropriate links in the description of this video. Also, if you want to reach out to me, there's obviously direct messages through the different socials, but if you want to just send an email, there is an email in the link of the description of this show. So that's where you'll find all of that information. Now, let's get started. The date right now as I'm recording this is December 14th. So that puts us 11 days away from Christmas Day. So we are well into December, which means we are well into the Advent season. And when most people think of Advent, they think of a number of different things, but most of them have to do with the exact same thing. So what a lot of people will ultimately think about is, going to be, candles that symbolize, faith and hope and joy, or a calendar of some sort. And the calendar is going to have all of the days of the month of December, or, maybe it's counting a different, counting down to 0 or something like that. And on this calendar, you might be ripping off some perforated cardboard and there's a prize behind it. Or maybe it's not a calendar. Maybe sometimes it's like those paper rings that have been joined together and you have 25 of them, and every day you wake up, you rip one apart and take it off, and then eventually you have 0 rings and it leads to a star or something like this. And all of these things are a countdown to Christmas Day. And the point of this is not necessarily during the Advent season, is not so we're counting down to Christmas Day. We're counting down to the celebration of the birth of the Christ. The fact that God has sent his Son into the world is our reality, and it frames our present reality. And during the Advent season, we celebrate the fact that he indeed sent him to do this. And so that's what all of these calendars are about. That's what all of the different services are about. They ultimately lead us to the same place, and that is the celebration of Jesus in a manger in Bethlehem, where we celebrate the fact that God the Word has now become flesh. And so that's definitely one part of Advent, and it's an important part. There's another part of Advent that doesn't get talked about as much, and that's really what I hope to address on this particular episode. And that part of Advent is the looking forward. So we understand during the Advent season, our reality here on earth is framed essentially by 2 really important events that surround the person of Jesus Christ. One is his birth, and the fact that he has indeed came into the world completely defines how we move around and how we are defined as human beings. But also, it's the fact that one day he has promised he's going to return. And so there's this looking backward during the Advent season to celebrate the fact that God has sent his Son into the world. And then we eagerly anticipate the fact that Christ is going to one day return to bring us home. And that is specifically why he's coming, to bring us home. And that becomes a difficult thing for people to celebrate, because as soon as we start talking about the end of the world, people have a tendency to be scared, and because of this fear, because of the questioning around it, instead of eagerly looking forward to it, we immediately begin to ask questions like, when? And that's the big one. When? How? Why? I want answers, and because we want answers, well, there's a big, huge group of people that are willing to give answers, and so this doesn't really become something that we celebrate. within the Christian community any longer. Instead, it becomes something that people debate back and forth as to how the world is going to end and when it's going to end. And ultimately, the idea that the Advent season and part of the Christmas season is meant to be talking about the end of the world. How can this possibly be a good thing? But the reality is it's supposed to be. It is supposed to be just that. A looking backwards and a looking forwards. Looking backwards with thankfulness and understanding that the promise has been fulfilled, and then looking forward with eager expectation, understanding that this promise will be fulfilled. And both of these things pair together, and they are they define our very existence as we live and move and breathe here on this earth. And yet, when we talk about the looking forward, instead of it being looking forward, it ends up being the type of thing where people are scared. And the reason, I think, is we get wrapped up in the questions of the when and the why and the how. And that's exactly what the disciples were dealing with. Because you see, in the end of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's this event that happens where the disciples are talking to Jesus and they are showing the temple off to him, which in and of itself is rather ridiculous because he is, God incarnate. He's the very Son of God. And so they're showing the temple that essentially, whether they realize it or not, has been built for him, to him. And rather than be impressed by it, he informs them that there's coming a time when every stone that is here is going to be just laid to waste. Not one stone will be left on another. This is all going to be gone. And we know that by their reaction, the disciples interpret this as being the end of their world, at least. They interpret this as being the end of all things because immediately they want to know when and where and how and why this is going to happen. You see, they go to the same exact place. They think of the fact that the world might end, and they want to know signs. They want some type of a clue. They want information. They want to know when. And interestingly enough, Jesus actually responds to them. And this is why this portion of the scripture, I think, is so important when we think about waiting for Jesus Christ to come. And when we think about the end of the world, it's because he answers him. And the answer is actually unexpected because he doesn't start by giving a bunch of details concerning the end. He doesn't tell them some sort of a magical date. He doesn't tell them which signs point to which thing and which scripture you should be reading, and or give them some large illustration. In fact, what he starts with is a warning. He starts by telling them to be careful, be awake, be aware. There's a warning right off the bat. And the warning is that they need to look out for the fact that because they are asking the question of when, why, and how, and where, because these are the things that they're concerned with, they are vulnerable to attacks. And those attacks are people coming in and saying, the Christ is over here, or I know how it's going to end. And because people can say this, and because this is the information I'm looking for as it concerns the end, I am vulnerable to falling into that trap, to be deceived, to be led astray. And so this is what Jesus is warning about right off the bat. Be careful that you are not led astray, because there's going to be people who come along and they are going to deceive people. They are going to make claims about Christ. They are going to tell people that they know when the world is going to end and how it's going to end. And they're going to lead people astray. So to be aware of this, first and foremost, is the thing that he says. Now, if Jesus is warning people of this, this means that this is a reality. Kind of along the lines of if I was driving down the road and I saw a sign that said, warning, bridge out ahead, I realized that I'm not supposed to interpret that as warning, the bridge might be out, so just carefully proceed with caution. No, I'm not supposed to go any farther. I turn around and I leave because I understand going down that road is death. You don't keep going down that road if that's your warning. In the same way, if Jesus is offering up a warning that there are people that you need to be aware of, if he's offering up a warning about this, it means that there's actually people who will be there to lead us astray. There will be people who are going to deceive people. There are going to be people that have all kinds of wonderful messages, and all they're doing is preying on people who are vulnerable. And we are vulnerable if we're asking these questions: when, where, why, how. The things that we obsess about when it comes to the end of the world, rather than looking at it much more in the sense of what we're supposed to be doing, and that is the eager expectation of his second coming. So how do we get to that place? We'll get to that eventually, but this is really, really important to understand first and foremost, is that this is what he starts with. He starts with this simple fact that there are going to be people who are there doing this, and we need to be aware of it, because they're going to be able to take a bunch of the different things that are going on in our life around us, and they're going to be able to use it to confuse and cause trouble in our lives, and basically lead people away from Christ, because that's what it is to be led astray. It's to lead people away from Jesus Christ. So this is the first thing that he addresses, and then the very next thing that he addresses, it almost as though these things kind of go together, I believe, because he goes on to say, like, don't be led astray, but at the same time understand, there's going to be a lot of bad things that are going on. When you talk about the end of the world, I want you to understand, he's telling his disciples, he's sharing with us, that there's going to be wars, there's going to be rumors of wars, there's going to be death, there's going to be all sorts of natural disasters, there's going to be disease. All of these things are going to be happening. And not only that, he tells the disciples themselves, you yourself are going to be put to the question, and bad things are going to happen to you. And the church is going to be put under persecution, and people are going to haul people right before rulers and do all of these sorts of things. And even, all of these things are going to happen as far as the end is concerned. And this is what's interesting, is that if we look at all of those different things that he's listed off, well, I mean, it's pretty easy in my day and age, in 2025, for me to say, well, man, I think we got them all. I know that there's wars that are going on in the world right now, and even right now there's wars, there's rumors of other wars, there's people that are dying, there's people that are sick, there are people who are homeless and starving, there's diseases. I mean, we just got through a pandemic, and who knows if there's another one coming along. So obviously he's talking about right now, right? I'm supposed to take these events and understand that I'm in the end times. This is it, right? And that's the temptation. Always. The temptation is that right there, because my problem is, as a human being, is that when I think of the end of the world, there's a certain amount of fear that's attached to it, and automatically I want to know when. I want to know when. I want to know how, because I'm convinced that if I know this information, it's somehow going to make everything better. And so that's the thing that's going to make it more survivable, if I can just figure out when. So I take all of these events and I begin to try to interpret them. And the reality is that these events have been going on the entire time. Throughout Christian history, just about in any period of time, a Christian could have sat down and there would have been wars. And there would have been rumors of wars. There would have been starvation. There would have been terrible calamities and natural disasters going on, and there would have been different diseases that were going on. And people would have been very easily convinced, I should say, that this is the end of the world. This is it. We're living in it right now. And then a few hundred years later, another group of people could have said the same thing. And then a few hundred years later, another group of people could have said the same thing, all the way until you arrive right here. So what gives? Was Jesus wrong when he began to talk about these things? No, the problem has nothing to do with him. The problem is he says all of these things, and then we don't pay attention because we're so obsessed with the when and the how and the why and all of these types of answers, because we want to figure it out. We assume that it's some sort of a mathematical equation, and I just got to figure out when it's going to happen. What's interesting is Jesus lists all of these things off. He tells his disciples that bad things are going to happen to them. And then he says, but understand, these things are not the end. They just point to the end. In fact, the way he actually describes them is he describes them by using the illustration, or by comparing them to a woman who's pregnant and nearing birth. And most people who understand this know what he's talking about, because he says of these events that we're looking at that these are birth pains. In other words, they're pregnancy contractions. And so anybody who knows anything about childbirth understands that when a woman reaches her due date, it's not like, okay, due date is here, and boom, out pops a baby. It's just like magic or something like that. No, what happens is pregnancy contractions happen. And when those pregnancy contractions happen, this is a sign that the baby is going to be born soon. Now, it won't, in some cases that can be like a matter of like an hour or less. In other cases, those things can go on for 24 to 48 hours, depending on, who the person is and what the situation is. But the reality is once they're there, once they're happening, yes, and it's time. It's time for the baby to happen. Now, this is what Jesus is saying of all of these events, is that these things are like the birth pains, the pregnancy contractions of this universe. Now, that doesn't mean that the creation is about to like pop out a baby or something silly like that. That's not what he's saying at all. What he's pointing out is that all of these things are happening because they're pointing to the fact that one day an end will come. This is how you interpret these things. The disciples are looking for a sign. We're looking for a sign, and essentially what Jesus is saying is we're surrounded by signs. That we're surrounded by signs every single day. Our problem is we want those signs to point to a specific date, and what he's telling us is these signs don't necessarily point to a specific date. They point to an important reality. And that reality is that this existence is coming to an end. This kingdom is coming to an end, and that one day we are entering into a kingdom. So at some point in time, we understand Jesus is going to return, and he's not going to return, to kind of like hang out and stay here forever. It says he's here to gather his people to him. And there's going to be a new heaven, and there's going to be a new earth. This is the whole point. It's always pointing to that event. So these are indeed signs, but the signs are not meant to point to specific times. And that's why it's so important when you go back to understanding the fact that there are indeed people who are out there who use these things to lead people astray. And we are always in danger of being led astray if we're obsessed with trying to figure out when or how. We are always in danger. And the reason we end up in those situations is because we are motivated by fear, and we're convinced that if somehow we can figure out when and how it's going to happen, then at that point in time, then everything's going to be okay. And so then all of a sudden you have somebody who comes along and they make sure that you understand, because this world event is happening over here, and this political leader, he got into power, and when he got into power, he made this specific speech when he said these specific words to this audience, and it was this time of day during this time of year. And by the way, these two countries, they just signed a treaty, and this heavenly body was here. And so as a result, all of these things come together, and it means that the end of the world is going to happen right now. And I have it figured out, and all you have to do is send me, $15, and I'll let you know exactly when it's going to end, and then follow after me. And if you give me more money, I'll teach you how to survive, because a lot of times that's all this ends up being, is some sort of a money grab. And I'd like to say that this doesn't go on right now, but I mean, my goodness, it just happened a couple of weeks ago. Or it wasn't a couple of weeks, it was more than a couple of weeks ago, but very recently, people were convinced all over the internet that the rapture was going to come. They had figured out the exact date, because that's what we like to do. We like to take all of these different things that are happening and say to ourselves that just because Jesus said these things are here, now we can figure out when he's going to come and what it's going to look like. And Jesus is saying, all of these things are signs, but they're all signs of the same thing. They're not signs of a time and a date. They're signs of an important reality. And this reality is this world is not our home. This is not the destination. That actually there is an end that's coming to it, and then there is going to be a new heaven and a new earth. And we are supposed to be looking forward to those things while we're here and we're existing here on this earth. And so, yes, these are signs, but not of what people expect us to believe they are. And so he tells his disciples this. And then what's interesting is he then answers the question concerning his second coming. Because this is what's interesting is people have this idea that when it comes to his second coming, oh yeah, we need to take our time and carefully figure out whether these events are going to come along. And so you have all of these people who are claiming to know that Jesus is here, and he's over here, and he's over here, and he basically is letting us know how ridiculous it is to follow after these things. Because when the Christ arrives, there's not going to be it that way. It's not going to be in somebody in secret saying, hey, I know how the world is going to end. You see, it's going to end when he comes. And when he comes, nobody's going to wonder whether or not he's here. Because Jesus says that when he arrives, when he returns, it's going to be like lightning crossing the sky. And that doesn't mean that lightning bolts are going to be striking or anything like this. He's talking about what that actually looks like. And so anybody who's ever been present to watch like a really, really violent thunderstorm with a lot of lightning, you understand what this is. Where lightning can go from one end of the sky to the other, where it kind of crackles across, or in some cases, it's just the whole sky lights up at the same exact time, and it's just all over the place. Boom. You know what? It'll stun a person. I can remember growing up around this. There's a lot of reactions I had. I've been awestruck by it. I've been terrified by it. But one thing I can promise you I've never done is I've never looked over at somebody who's with me and said, hey, was that lightning? Because if I would have said, hey, is that lightning? They would have answered and said, what are you, like an idiot or something? Of course that's lightning. Because nobody wonders when you actually see lightning whether or not you saw lightning. Because the very nature of it is just something that's so overpowering that you understand and know what you've seen right away. And this is what Jesus is saying about his second coming. That when he comes again, it's going to be like lightning in the sky. Everybody's going to know instantaneously that it's happening. It's going to happen fast. It's going to happen unexpectedly. It's going to happen in an instant. And nobody's going to say to themselves, hey, do you think Jesus is here? And somebody's going to look back. I'm not really sure. No, everybody will know. The moment he arrives, everybody will know. It says in the scriptures that there will be people who are going to be begging for the mountains to cover them up because he's going to show up in all of his power, all of his glory. The creation itself is going to dissolve. It says he's going to roll it up like a scroll. He's not coming as a little manger, in a manger in Bethlehem, unknown. He's going to arrive as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords with us, in all of his power. Nobody will sit there scratching their head and trying to figure out whether or not the end is here. We'll know. There will be no doubt. And that's what's so fascinating is that Jesus is saying, in the meantime, yes, there's going to be all kinds of signs, but the signs are pointing to the same thing, that one day he's returning. And so we look forward to that return. And in the meantime, while we're waiting, we understand there's going to be people that are running around and they're going to take all of these signs and they're going to try to tell people, hey, the Christ is here. And understand, if they're doing that, they're lying to you, because if he was here, you would know. If the end was here, you would know. It's not going to happen in a secret way. And so understand, there's going to be things that are going on. And they're going to be troubling. People are going to get sick. We're going to witness wars and rumors of wars. There's going to be starvation. There's going to be natural disasters. There's going to be a lot of these things. And I'm not saying it to minimize them. They're terrible and they're very difficult to survive through. They can change our lives. But even as we look at these things, we can understand, as terrible as they are, they're all pointing to the same reality. And that reality is one day Jesus is returning. Okay? And at the same time, they also, while we examine them, we don't allow them to overcome us to the point where we're living in fear and terror of a second coming. Because if we're doing that, then we're always in a place where the other people can come along and take all of these things and carefully construct them. And explain to you that because of the way they put them together, they have found a way to interpret exactly when Jesus is coming and exactly how he's going to come. And so follow after me. So Jesus is offering up warnings right off the bat. He's offering up warnings, and these warnings are there to simply say, don't be led astray. You keep the faith. You keep grounded in all that you're doing. And even as you're watching all of these different things, you are supposed to understand that all of these events that are playing out in front of us, they have to happen, and they signal the end. Don't lose faith. Be at peace. Now, how can we be at peace when we understand that at some point in time he's going to return in this way and the entirety of it all is going to be destroyed? It's because when he comes back, he's not coming here to punish. He's coming here, what the book of Hebrews actually says of him is he's coming here, and for anybody who knows him, for anybody who believes him, his only reason for coming is to gather them to himself. And it's not as though he's going to come and there's going to be somebody who has the ability to challenge him or hurt you if you're found in him. He's here to take you home to the place that he's gone to prepare. The place that he says, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I tell you that I've gone to prepare a place for you, then I go to prepare a place for you because I'm not lying to you. And so when he comes, this is what he's going to do. He's going to gather his people together. In the meantime, yes, life can be difficult. It can. But we don't lose heart because we understand that he is on the throne and he is going to take care of us. And actually what the book of Luke actually says of it is that when all of these things happen, we are to understand that we're not going to beg the mountains to cover us. It says of us that we will lift up our heads because we understand that this is our Redeemer approaching us. And this is what gives us the ability, I think, to look forward to the second coming of Christ, not with a measure of fear, but rather an eager expectation, because we understand the purpose of the world ending is so that the greater reality can continue on. So that the new heaven, the new earth will happen, and Jesus is here to take us with him. And when I think about it, I just think about the fact that it changes everything when you understand that we know how it ends. Recently I watched a highlight that I hadn't watched in a long time. And it's, for anybody who's followed football, you might understand what this is. But there's this play called the Minneapolis Miracle. I grew up in Minnesota, so I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan. But anybody who is a Minnesota Vikings fan, you know what the Minneapolis Miracle is. And even if you're not a Vikings fan, do you know what the Minneapolis Miracle is? And I was watching that highlight, and I remember how I was just enjoying every bit of it, because regardless of how this plays out, I couldn't wait to watch the end and see how it all played out, where Case Keenum throws to Stephon Diggs, and he runs down the sideline, and he throws his helmet off, and I'm already picturing this before the ball is even snapped. And I realized I remember watching this when it was live, and I did not feel the slightest bit happy. I wasn't eagerly excited to see what was going to happen because I was convinced with complete certainty that the game was over and the Vikings had lost. And so there was nothing fun about watching that unfold because I didn't know how it ended. Now what's interesting is watching a highlight today, it's a blast because I already know how it's going to end. I can listen to the announcers. I can see the fans in the stands that are just bemoaning the fact that they had the audacity to even cheer for the Vikings because here they're going to let them down again. I can do that with a smile on my face because I know how it ends. I know that in the end, they win. And that's what gives us the ability to eagerly await the second coming of Christ because in the end, we win. It's not about trying to figure out when and where it's going to happen. That won't give you any sense of peace. That won't help you. But knowing you win, knowing how it ends, that does. That does give us the ability to continue to look and await the second coming of Christ and do so with eager expectation. Because we understand he's not coming here to dole punishment out to you if you believe in him. He's not coming here demanding a price for you because any price that needs to be paid has already been paid. He's not coming here with some type of terrible thing that's going to be, paid out on us. No, his purpose for coming here is to take you home to where we belong. And this home is going to be one in which we are united to him and we are heirs and co-heirs with him in the kingdom of God. And this is really the whole point of eagerly awaiting his second coming, where we understand that while we're here, this is all we're really waiting for. And Jesus is really careful to explain. So when we understand this, when we understand that this part is taken care of, the most important fact is not trying to figure out when and where. It's not trying to discern a bunch of different things. It's keeping the faith and being prepared for his second coming always. And you're not going to be prepared by figuring out the date or listening to somebody else who claims that they have it figured out, or figuring out, what all of these different world events mean. That's not going to help you. You're not going to be prepared because somebody told you that they know where the Christ is, or that if you follow after them, that they know how the world ends or something like that. That won't prepare you. In fact, Jesus lets us know how we are going to be prepared. You see, in the Gospel of Matthew, he tells a series of parables concerning the very end and concerning what it actually looks like to be prepared. And in the end, he ends with this one that's called, in many places, the Great White Throne Judgment, where it says that the Master is going to stand over all of these people, and he's going to separate them left and right. And to the one group of people, he's going to welcome them into his kingdom. And to the other group of people, he's going to shed them off and say that he never knew them. And he says what's going to separate them is that one group of people was prepared to meet their God and the other wasn't. Welcome to the kingdom. Because, he says, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was sick, you took me in. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was imprisoned, you visited me. In all of these cases, you were there taking care of me. And the people are going to answer, Christ says, when did we do any of these things to you? And he says, when you did this to the least of people, that's when you were doing it to me. And so being prepared is not about trying to figure out who the Antichrist is or who the Antichrist isn't, or when the tribulation starts or when it doesn't. Whether or not there's going to be a rapture or whether, or anything like that, which is what we tend to do. We argue over all of this garbage as it concerns the end of the world, thinking that if we can figure these things out, now we'll be prepared. When actually all we're supposed to do is wait for him to be coming while we minister Jesus Christ to the world around us. And we share him and we share his love with the world around us. This is what it means to be prepared. Constantly waiting for him, understanding he'll come unexpectedly. Nobody's going to know. Not the angels, not the Son of God himself. Only God is privy to this information. So don't try to figure it out. Just take heart that one day he's returning to take us home. And if we're looking for what it is that makes us prepared for him to take us home, it's when we're ministering him to the people around us. Because this is who he cares about. And understanding that when we do this to the least of people, we're doing it to him. Because in the end, the only thing that really makes us truly ready, truly prepared to meet him, is to be known by him and to know him. And when we know him, and when we're known by him, we can eagerly await the day we get to see him face to face. We can eagerly await that day, understanding that this is what we celebrate every single day. And while I do that, this frames my reality today, because while I wait for that, I get the opportunity to minister him to other people, and I get to share the same love he has towards me with other people on a regular basis. And in doing this, I am prepared. So, have a wonderful Advent season. Look backwards and celebrate the fact that the Messiah has come, and eagerly await his second coming with no fear in your hearts, none whatsoever, because one day he is returning. And when he does, it's to take us home. And we can simply say, "Come, Lord Jesus, and come quickly." Thank you. You guys have a wonderful day.